Welcome to Michael Potts Photography, the story behind the photograph. Today I'd like to share with you this night photograph of the Hungarian Houses of Parliament. The Hungarian Houses of Parliament are an icon of the city. They have captured the imagination of thousands of people. I first photographed them back in 2005, and they are one of my favourite subjects to photograph whenever I visit the city, whether photographed on misty mornings or from the far reaches of the other side of the city. Here's a shot showing the building's timelessness. This is a long exposure shot taking midday, and it gives you a sort of sense of feeling about how the building has stood on the side of the Danube for over 100 years and how much time has passed in the interim. But it's the night photography of the Houses of Parliament that inspire me the most. As the sun goes down, the whole building becomes illuminated. It's quite magical to watch because the lights turn on from the left-hand side and work their way to the right. And it makes the building look absolutely gorgeous from multiple different views. Here's a photograph from further up the river. You can see the red lights of cars winding their way below me, but the building looks like a jewel box and it stands out from everything around it. Here is an image taken from a nearby bridge, and if you look carefully you can see lots of tiny dots above the dome. This is light reflecting off birds who are busy hunting insects, attracted by the lights of the Parliament. The city really does look magical at night. They light up a lot of the national monuments and the bridges and make the whole place look like a magical fairy tale wonderland. In 1873, Budapest was created by uniting three cities, Buda, Óbuda and Pest. 7 years later, it was decided to build a new representative parliament building. This was effectively an early version of crowdsourcing. An international competition was held and Imre Steindl produced the winning design in a neo-Gothic style. In 1885, building started on the east bank of the Danube, on Kőszeg Square on the Pest side of the city. It took inspiration from the Houses of Parliament in London. While they did inaugurate it in 1896, the presumed 1,000-year anniversary of the country, it was only fully completed in 1904. Sadly, the architect Imre Steindl went blind and passed away before the building was completed, so he never saw his vision realised. It is still the largest building in Hungary. Reportedly, around 10,000 local craftsmen were involved in its construction, using predominantly local materials, which included 40 million bricks, 500,000 precious stones, and around 40 kilograms of gold. There's 3 kilometers of red carpet running throughout the building. Symbolism is layered throughout. There are two identical wings which represent the two Houses of Parliament, the upper and lower house, that were in place when the building was constructed. Both houses are represented equally, and they're united by the dome that rises in between. Today, there's only one house, which is the National Assembly, consisting of 199 seats. The second chamber was abolished after World War II when the country became communist. There's also symbolism in the architectural style. The floor plan is Baroque, the facade is neo-Gothic, and the dome is Renaissance Revival. The dome is 96 meters tall, which echoes the nation's 1,000-year anniversary, which is 1896, and the supposed founding of Hungary in 896. If you look at the facade, you'll notice that there's no chimneys. Instead, Steindl developed a complex cooling and heating system where steam was generated in a neighbouring building and pumped into the House of Parliament through grates. There was also a cooling system which relied on some ornamental ponds in the main square. There is a grand staircase running through the middle of the building, leading towards the dome, and it's bedecked with jewels and gold. It's only accessible to high-ranking officials and members of the legislature on specific days. There is a bust of Imre Steindl overlooking the staircase, and the staircase consists of 123 stairs. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible to photograph the main domed section because this is where the state crown is housed. It's a magnificent space, and it is really worth a visit. Here is the room that the National Assembly meet in. It's a really beautiful space with lots of intricate design details. Even in the early 1900s, smoking was banned inside this chamber. So generally the members of Parliament would congregate in the corridors around the Assembly, smoking cigars. But when one of the famous orators came to present, members would put down their cigars in these numbered cigar stands and go and listen. And it was one way you could tell how effective a speech had been by how many members had let their expensive cigars burn down. photograph that I'd like to show you today was taken from the Buddhist side of the city, and it's directly opposite the Houses of Parliament. Now, if you go here and you would like to take a similar shot, there's two things to keep in mind. Firstly, get as close to the water's edge as possible. I noticed that a lot of people were photographing this from the road above. Unfortunately, when you photograph from here, you get a lot of the foreground in the shot, and that just isn't very attractive. Secondly, make sure you wear mosquito repellent because there are an awful lot of mosquitoes. I photographed this with a Nikon D850. It's a 30-second shot at f/20 ISO 64 at 24mm. I'm using a 24-70 2.8 lens. I've used a 6-stop ND filter to help reduce the amount of light. The first thing I do in any photograph is straighten the image. Lightroom has an auto straightening tool. It usually gets it pretty accurately, but it's always important to make sure the image is straightened to your eye. I then adjusted the basic settings of the highlights, the shadows, the lights and the darks, and the color balance. I wanted to get the building's color as close to the final image as possible. I then added a linear gradient to the foreground. This lightened the foreground a little bit, but also removed some of the detail of the water. It's quite tricky to get the water balance right because you want to have as smooth a surface as possible, but it's got to still look like water. I added a gradient to the sky. Here I lightened the sky a little bit and increased the lighter colors around the clouds, bringing these elements back into the photograph. The blue contrasts nicely with the yellow of the buildings. I then used the brush tool to go through the buildings to highlight any areas that were unnaturally dark. It's always difficult to artificially light a building, so you can cheat a little bit in photography. This is quite tricky because you want the building to look unified, you want it to look crisp and sharp, but you don't want it to be too contrasty. Once I was happy with the general structure of the photograph, I ran Topaz Labs sharpening tool. This helps just make everything look a little bit crisper and makes everything look a little bit more punchy. Topaz Labs tool is fantastic on landscapes as well as portraiture. It struggles a little bit when it comes to lettering, so try to avoid it when you're using a photograph that has a logo or some text in it. And finally, because I wasn't quite happy with the smoothness of the water, I took the photograph into Photoshop and added a motion blur. To do this, I made a new layer, which is a copy of the photograph, selected the blur tool, and then applied a motion blur to that. As you can see, the whole image is now blurred. The next step is then to take the erase tool and erase everything that you don't want to be blurred, so everything that isn't water in this case. And when that's completed, you're left with a beautiful photograph of the jewel box of the Danube. Thank you so much for joining me onto this journey into the Hungarian Houses of Parliament. I really do hope you've enjoyed it. If you like this image, please do head over to my print store where you'll see this and many others available for sale. Until the next one, goodbye.